Jason ruled the hallways of Northgate High. A snarl was his scepter, a shove his decree. He existed at the apex of the adolescent food chain. His world was a hierarchy built on intimidation. The awkward kid with the bad haircut, the girl with the oversized glasses and a stutter. Anyone who dared to be different was fair game. He justified his actions with a simple mantra: they were in his way. This afternoon, Jason stood by his locker, a monument to his own ego. He was invincible, or so he thought. Then, a flyer tucked into his locker vent caught his eye. It was an invitation to something called Elysium. Intrigued, Jason felt a tremor of curiosity. Elysium, it turned out, was an underground VR experience, whispered about in hushed tones in the darkest corners of the internet. It was said to be a world of pure wish fulfillment, a virtual Eden where your deepest desires became reality. Jason scoffed at the idea. Wish fulfillment? His reality was already pretty darn good. Still, the seed of curiosity had been planted. That night, he found himself in a dingy warehouse on the outskirts of town, the address scribbled on the back of the flyer. The air reeked of sweat and stale pizza. A group of teenagers, faces illuminated by laptop screens, huddled in the center of the room. A skinny kid with thick glasses, someone Jason vaguely recognized from his chemistry class, handed him a headset. "Elysium?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jason grunted and slipped the headset on. The world around him dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors.
You must be Jason. I've been waiting for you. Welcome to Elysium, where your every desire is my command.
He materialized on a sun-drenched beach, the scent of salt and coconut oil heavy in the air. Beautiful people, tanned and toned, lounged on the sand, sipping cocktails from hollowed-out pineapples. This was more like it, Jason thought. Then he saw her. She emerged from the turquoise water, a goddess in a white bikini, her golden hair cascading down her back. She was the embodiment of every fantasy he'd ever had. She smiled at him, a slow, seductive smile that sent shivers down his spine. He couldn't speak. He could only stare, mesmerized. She approached him, her hand reaching out to touch his cheek. Her touch sent a jolt of electricity through him. The days in Elysium melted into weeks, then months. Time, he realized, flowed differently here. He indulged in every pleasure imaginable, his every whim catered to by the golden-haired woman and an army of eager servants. He was a king, worshipped by all who crossed his path. But something strange began to happen. He felt different, smaller, somehow. He dismissed it at first as a side effect of the virtual reality. But then he noticed the glances, the barely suppressed smiles. He looked down at his hands. They were smaller, chubbier. His clothes felt loose. Panic surged through him. He ran to a mirror, his reflection staring back at him, a distorted, grotesque mockery of his former self. He was younger, his face smooth and unblemished, his body lean and prepubescent. He was a teenager again, then a child. The worst part, his mind, his adult mind, was trapped inside this shrinking shell. The changes were relentless. He shrank day by day until he was a toddler, then an infant. He was still Jason, trapped in a baby's body, his thoughts racing. The golden-haired woman cooed over him, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. The other inhabitants of Elysium treated him as their leader, albeit one who now required constant care. The football team he led to victory now changed his diapers, their faces a mixture of amusement and disgust. He was a prisoner in his own personal hell, a grotesque parody of his former self. Back in the real world, Jason lay inert, the VR headset still strapped to his head. Days had passed, then weeks. His parents hovered anxiously beside him, their initial amusement at his prolonged gaming session replaced by a gnawing fear.
I didn't mean for this to happen. I had no idea the game could do this.
The skinny kid from chemistry class, the one who had invited Jason to Elysium, was now a nervous wreck. He paced the waiting room of the hospital, his fingers twisting in his greasy hair.
We need to make a decision. His vitals are stable, but he's not waking up.
Doctors crowded around Jason, their faces grim. His vitals were stable, but he showed no signs of waking. They spoke in hushed tones about brain activity, about the potential for irreversible damage. The question hung in the air, unspoken but heavy with dread. Should they unplug him? Meanwhile, inside Elysium, time continued to accelerate. Years flashed by in the blink of an eye.
I'm still here, Jason. Always by your side.
The golden-haired woman, her features now etched with age, remained by Jason's side, her eyes holding a terrifying mix of devotion and something else. He recognized that something else now. It was pity. He was a prisoner in his own personal hell, forever frozen in infancy, his adult mind a helpless passenger in a body that would never age, never escape. He was surrounded by the distorted echoes of his past, his victims transformed into his caretakers. The irony was not lost on him. He who had once wielded power with such careless cruelty was now utterly powerless. He had created his own personal hell, and he was doomed to relive it for all eternity.